Okay, joining us now, Jamil Jaffer. He's former counsel to the Assistant Attorney General for the U.S. National Security. He's also served as a former associate counsel to President George W. Bush. So good to have you on the show. What we think we're looking at here, at least from what the authorities are saying at the very least, is some kind of ISIS-inspired attack, at perhaps very worst, some form of ISIS-sponsored attack. Your immediate observations on what we've seen and heard today?
Well, Julia, obviously a concerning situation there taking place in New Orleans with 10 dead, at least maybe 30 or more injured. What we know now is that the man involved in the attack, Shamsuddin, was apparently had an ISIS flag in his car or on the back of the pickup truck. He also apparently had some IEDs stored in coolers in the back of the truck as well. We also understand now we're hearing reporting that apparently there were 3 men and a woman identified putting in place what appear to be suspected IEDs, improvised explosive devices, in other parts of the French Quarter as well. So it appears it may have been a coordinated attack between this individual and a number of others. They're currently on the hunt for those other individuals. He was obviously killed in the incident. But the biggest concern here obviously is this the beginning of more attacks? If there were 4 people coordinating, potentially 5, potentially in New Orleans, might there be other attacks in the offing, whether in New Orleans or elsewhere? That's what the authorities are most concerned about. That's why they want to identify these other individuals involved and get their hands on them.
What would you be looking for, Jamil, if you did want to tie this to some more concerted terrorism effort and affiliated, as we mentioned, with the sticker or the flag that we believe was on the truck?
Well, I think what they will probably do is they'll be looking at his devices, any phones he had on him, any information they can identify. Apparently, this truck was rented through the Turo ride car-sharing app, so they'll identify what email address he used to get in touch with the person to rent that car, and see if they can identify whether he's in communication with other individuals, other potential groups that might be plotting other attacks in other cities or in New Orleans itself. As you know, the Sugar Bowl was supposed to be held later today. It's now been pushed to tomorrow, but that looks like it's going to go forward. The Super Bowl's in a few weeks in New Orleans as well. And so there are concerns about New Orleans itself, but across the country, one might wonder if this is just the beginning of a series of attacks around the inauguration coming up here on January 20th in Washington, D.C., and the like.
And I think one of the other critical questions that we've certainly been asking now throughout the day as we've gathered more information about this individual is how and when the radicalization took place. And it goes to your point about checking his digital footprint, his conversations, Google searches, for example, just to understand the thinking behind this individual and perhaps known associates that obviously the FBI are investigating.
Oh, Julie, that's exactly right. I mean, look, what we know about him thus far is he's apparently a U.S. citizen from Texas. He was in the U.S. military. As we understand it, it appears that he had an honorable discharge. There's also been some discussion. We've seen some reporting suggesting that he had financial difficulties. There were some court filings that we're aware of that indicated he had some financial trouble, some debts and the like. So one might wonder whether those things came together. He also did get out of his car after driving to this crowd of individuals. He got out of his car and exchanged fire with police. And so we'll find out more about his military training as well as we go forward. But the concern, of course, is how does an American citizen, here who served in the military ostensibly honorably, turn into a killer, turn into a terrorist, turn into somebody who's affiliated ostensibly with ISIS with this flag on his car and killing people, civilians, just sort of enjoying themselves in revelry after New Year's Eve. That's obviously the big concern, is how does that happen? How do we prevent it from happening? How do we ensure there aren't others who have been radicalized like him? As we know, ISIS has been trying for years to radicalize Americans in the United States, to conduct attacks here as well as in our allied countries in Europe.
Which is exactly what I was going to ask you next, because you touched upon the point. We have a number of very important events coming up, not only in New Orleans with this postponed Sugar Bowl college football game, but to your point, we have a funeral for President Carter coming up. We also have an inauguration later on in January too. From a national security perspective, how will authorities be looking at this and this investigation at this moment?
Well, obviously, they're going to be on a heightened state of alert. They're obviously deeply concerned about what happened in New Orleans and concerned about it happening elsewhere. Events like the Super Bowl, like the presidential inauguration on January 20th, are what are called national security special events. So law enforcement and the military, National Guard and the like, Secret Service have been planning around those events now for months already. They'll be now at a heightened level of alert. They'll be putting more and more officers on the streets to identify whether there are potential concerns and then look at the intelligence once again to see if there are any threats to those events. And then you'll see an additional focus on events that are taking place that might not have been as high priority. The swearing in of Congress just this week on Friday, the election of the Speaker of the House, the counting of ballots. As we know, January 6th last time was a flashpoint here in the United States. We may see questions around that as well. And so these national security special events will be already focused on, but now they'll be looking at other events as well that might be potential targets and seeing if there's any intelligence suggesting there's a threat. And if there is, stepping up the police and law enforcement activities around those events.
Yeah, entire nation consequences as a result of what we've seen in the past 24 hours. Jamil, so good to have you with us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me on, Julia.